I usually record this at home and my Wi-Fi
Uh-huh.
is non-existent. There's no internets there. And so I'm at my work, which is my Kung Fu
Oh,
school, hence all the weapons in the
I know.
background.
I was gonna say, look at all your cool weapons in the back. It makes me feel like I don't want to feel left out. So,
There you
let's
go.
let's go
Yeah,
ahead
I
and have a
think you should just,
conversation here,
yes, exactly. I think
Yeah,
that's how we should start the show.
yeah.
Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Hello, Zach. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast.
Yes, I'm very excited that we finally connected. I've been wanting to
I know.
be on it for a while since I first heard
Oh,
about it. So
oh my
very
goodness. Well,
excited.
we don't want to overplay it too much because
Yeah.
it could not live up to the hype and that would be terrible. But we met actually in Portland at Rose City
Yep.
Comic Con, which was such a fun con. I really enjoy that one. It is to me like a great size. I feel like it centers a bit more on comic creators,
Mhm.
writers, artists, etc., versus a lot of the other cons who've kind of gone the Hollywood way, I guess you could
Yep.
say. Well, what are your thoughts?
I mean, Rose City is one of my favorite cons because it's the perfect size to where I can still make money working at a booth because that's always important when you're there as a creator. But also, it's not so crazy that you don't get to spend time with people, And I have so many friends that live in Portland, and so it's just a great. Yeah, I think, like I said, it's like a perfect size. They also I'm really impressed with the convention themselves. They've tried to position themselves recently as something a little bit different, especially with Portland's massive wealth of comic creators. So they've created what they call the creator track, which is now basically positioning Rose City Comic Con as the place for people who want to break into comics to go to that convention and get portfolio reviews. And I'm also part of that creator track. I lead a panel called the fine print crew, which is basically all those jobs in comics that aren't the sexy ones. Like I always tell people, it's cool to be in a band, but not everyone's going to be the guitarist and not everyone's going to be the lead singer, but you can still play the bass. You can still operate the lights. There's all sorts of jobs in there that people maybe they're not the awesome ones that they think about, or maybe that's a step up. Maybe you get a foot in your door and you're, you know, operating the lights, and then someone hears you singing karaoke and hire whatever it is. I like that's one of my roles that I do is try and show people how you can work in comics in all of these other support roles that aren't necessarily the writer and line artist.
Yeah, I think that is super important, which is again why I think I really enjoy it because, like you, I have so many friends in the
Hmm.
Portland comics community, and it's like you still have room to breathe where you can just like, you know what, I'm gonna leave the table and I'm gonna go around and talk to the
Yep.
people and humans that I enjoy. And again, it's not to belittle or like talk smack about other cons, but I get frustrated when I'm at an event and I have to find like Artist Alley and
Hmm.
I'm like, where is that? It's nowhere to be found, and they're like still called Comic Cons. Like it would be a
Hmm.
different thing if they changed the name, but so I always get a little grumpy about that.
Yep. I
And
really,
so
yeah, I know. I completely agree. I mean, I think that, the way our Rose City Comic Con is done is just, and I really I like the Left Field Media that runs it. I work with them also for a couple other cons like Anime NYC in New York and Anime Frontier in Dallas, and they just really put on a good show. One of the panel runners, Leslie Hunziker, she is just phenomenal, and I work with her every year as well, not only on the creator track, but they let us do some really fun things. Like last year, Diana Schutz had missed her plane, and she wasn't able to get
oh
her Hall of Fame Eisner Award, and she was really bummed
yes,
about it.
Diana.
Yeah, so we worked with Leslie for a secret surprise party for her at Rose
I
City Comic
saw
Con, and
that.
yeah,
Oh, we
it was
love
just
Diana. She's
oh, she's amazing. She's
amazing.
beyond amazing. Yeah,
Oh,
and it was so nice, because it shows that that's a con that really truly cares about people, that they were willing to donate all of those resources to do something so incredible just for one person.
yes, that you're right. It says a lot, and
Mhm.
I feel like they do. They take a bit better care of their creators. But I
Mhm.
was happy to meet you as
That
well
said,
because
I was gonna say that said I once went in the wrong door at Rose City Comic Con, and I saw how they treat the celebrity guests, and all of them get a little gift basket of local beer and all this other stuff, and
you're like,
and
hey, hey,
after,
hey, wait a
yeah,
minute.
hey, where's the gift basket for the comics guests, huh? Come on, where's our gift baskets?
That was probably written into their writers. Like
Oh
you
yeah.
know, they get all sorts of fun things as
Yep.
celebrity guests. I mean, to be fair, it is still a business, and we do
Yep.
understand what celebrity guests do bring to
And
conventions. Like I
yep.
get that part, but I do love that it's like behind the line. Like you want to
Hmm.
see celebrity guests, it's like over there, and that's the
Hmm.
section, and it doesn't take away
Go do your
from
thing,
the
and yeah.
rest. Yeah.
Yep.
So, but yeah, you're right though. I mean,
Yep.
there's no reason you guys should not be getting the local
I
craft
mean,
beers and things like that. I mean,
I get it. More people
yeah.
are going to see David Tennant than us. I mean, that's once again just the facts of life. But whatever. It's all good.
Oh my gosh. Well, but the great thing is, even though we're, so wired in, it's like this is the first time that we got to meet. So that was
Hmm.
great because it's
It
only my
was,
second
yeah.
time to Rose City, but
Oh, was it
I
really?
was
I thought you've
really
been there regularly.
not regularly. It's
Oh.
I'm on the East Coast and all the way down.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's not like close by for me to get
I
to.
I thought you were in Portland for some reason. I think,
Because I'm so tight with all the Portland community.
yeah, really. I think
Yeah.
I first heard about you because I saw Gail Simone tweeting about you. And so
Yes.
somehow
Yeah.
I just assumed that you were part of the whole Portland thing.
I know,
Oh,
and I don't even work in comics. Let's also like keep rewinding here. Like I have zero credibility when it comes to working in comics or anything. However, since my fandom turned into being, a podcaster, but also kind of an outlet for a lot of the community. So Greg Rucka and I, over the pandemic, like podcasted almost every week together, and so that became a thing, and then so Greg's friends became my friends, and it kind of grew that way. But through everything, I've now since like done accuracy reading and things like that for like Jean Lewin Young, which is really cool because I've worked on projects with him now, and so I can sort of say like I've had like I'm the lighting person in the back that
yeah,
like runs
right.
the cable, and yeah,
No.
I'm the grip. I'm the grip. I'm
See?
utility grip one. But so
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So, but I do not claim to like know anything
All right.
about
Well,
comic creation.
if you are in Portland or Rose City Comic Con again, let me know, and I will throw you on my fine print crew panel because like accuracy readers is another thing that's so important. Like I
Yes,
do that for a lot of different comics also
I
because
bet.
because of my own specialty. Like I get really annoyed by what I call Japan as decoration, and it's something that you see a lot of comics do nowadays. Well, not just comics, a lot of places like Japan's cool, so they want to throw in something cool, and
Mhm.
I think like probably the most, and then they don't actually get anyone that speaks Japanese or knows Japanese, so they just Google something entirely random and they just throw it into their comic. And
Yeah,
if you actually know about the subject, it just looks stupid. They just like, it doesn't look cool, you just look stupid. And I'm like, how much effort would it have taken you to just
exactly.
like just reach out and ping someone? It's not like I'm hidden, just ping someone and be like, hey dude, I want to do this scene, can you just double check this for me, what I Googled? Like,
100%.
yeah.
100%. I mean, and speaking of which, I had actually forgotten Diana had reached out to me because she also does
Mhm.
work with translation and doing other things. And she reached out to me on one of her food projects that was crossover with
Yep.
culture. And so it was like so fascinating. Is this is where you can see the difference between those that take those extra steps to try to
Mhm.
get every little thing right and just like go the distance. Of course, she's
Yep.
definitely one of those people. But yeah, you're right. One of the most frustrating things is seeing how they just Googled something, and
Yep.
you and I know Google Translate is not quite there when it
No.
comes
Yeah,
to
well,
especially like Chinese, Japanese, and some of those languages. Maybe Spanish
yep.
isn't too bad, but like, uh, yeah.
Well, and like even with Google Translate, even though it's gotten so much better, the thing that they'll always miss is context. And I think one of the biggest examples of that in modern comics is Wolverine had a son, and the person named him Duckin, which he claimed was a slur for mixed race people, which meant all he did was he went to Google Translate and he put in the word mongrel and hit translate and came out with Duckin, which is accurate. Duckin is in fact the Japanese word for mongrel, meaning a mixed breed dog. The thing is that in Japan, it's not an insult. It's basically a goofy name that you call your puppy, like who's a
Yep.
bad little boy, who's a goofy little puppy. Like you look up Doc in Japanese, it's just a bunch of pictures of goofy looking dogs with their owners, patting them on the head. And so, but because he didn't understand the context, all he went with was swapping the word around. And then that has become part of, Marvel Comics forever because he was just too lazy to ask someone who spoke Japanese. Because I mean,
Oh,
it's not like Japan doesn't have a lot of great insults. They've got great insults. They've got a
yeah.
whole host of them,
You're
But
like, there was a long
yeah,
list I could have added to
right.
this.
But things like that are so culturally bound that it's not just the word that matters,
Correct.
And that's something that you do in translation so much. Is like you're not just swapping words, you're swapping context.
Yes. And, speaking of which, how did you get from not just, I mean, because I knew you have the background and everything, but
Mhm,
like, what was your draw to Japanese culture and speaking so fluently,
mhm.
translating? Did you just kind of grow up a
No, I mean,
polyglot?
oh God, no, not at all. Like I like to tell people I'm your inspirational story of it's never too late to ruin your life and live the life you want to lead. Because like, I mean, I think like I grew up in the 80s and there really wasn't a lot of Japanese content and stuff like that. It was totally different from what it's like now. It's hard to imagine what a wasteland it was at the time of the 80s, and because the internet didn't exist, and so we were really isolated. And like I had gone to see, when I was really young, my mother took me to see the movie Seven Samurai, and I just became
Ooh,
absolutely enamored of it.
yes.
Yeah, and enamored not only so much of the film itself, but just the concept of a foreign language. Because I'd never really, I'd grown up in a small town, like one of the whitest towns on earth in Spokane, Washington, like literally, like if you look at the statistics, and so I was never exposed much to any sort of foreign culture except through entertainment and especially foreign languages. So like sitting in the dark and watching Seven Samurai for 3.5 hours, it was the first time I actually was immersed in a foreign language. I was just
Yeah.
fascinated with it. I was like, it wasn't that they were speaking that was so interesting. It was like, what must it look like inside their heads? Like I couldn't imagine what their thought process must be like. And then I tried studying Japanese. Like I took some classes in junior high, but when they offered it, only two people signed up for it. So they canceled the class. And just like all through my life, I've sort of dabbled in it. And then when I think I was about 33 years old, and I was working at Amazon as a project manager. And I was like just sitting there at my desk one day, and I was like I had all the things that people tell you is a good life, right? I had a good job, I had stock options, I had prospects, I had promotion. Like I could have just followed this road and been what society tells you is successful. But I was just sitting at my desk going like, you know what? I fucking hate this. Like, is this all I get? Is this all I get out of life? Is to work for a job I don't care about, managing projects that I have no interest if they succeed or fail. I was just, and I just you know what? I have always wanted to learn Japanese. Like, it's one of those things I've always wanted to do. So I Googled how to live in Japan. I didn't Google at the time because Google didn't exist. I
Right.
net I Netscaped how
Netscaped.
I
I'll age
Netscaped,
myself.
yeah,
Know exactly what you're talking about.
how to live in Japan. And I came across this thing called the JET program, which basically allowed you to go live in Japan for a year on a visa. And so I just basically said, you know what? I am quitting my job. So I quit my job at Amazon, threw all of that away, and jumped on a plane to a place I'd never been before.
Wow.
Yeah, and I lived there I actually started studying Japanese far from being racist. I started studying Japanese when I was about 33. Intended to go over for 1 year, came home like 8 years later, you know. Yeah, and just once I was there, I just dove into studying Japanese like a madman because I figured this is your shot in life. And from if you come home from this shot, Zach, not bilingual, you have absolutely no one to blame but yourself. Is how I felt about it. I'm like, this is your shot, and so you need to just take it. Yeah,
Yeah. Fascinating. And I love this. I love the "It's never too late to ruin your life"
yeah, it's
line, by the
not.
way.
It's
Well, it's funny because I mentor and teach a lot of kids, right? So obviously I mentioned off
hmm
air, I was like, yeah, here I am at my kung fu school. This is
hmm
my actual day job. But like these kids put so much weight into this college decision, what they're gonna do, quote unquote, for the rest of their lives. I'm like, you're
Yep.
gonna have like 4 different jobs between now and whenever. Like this is not the end all be all
hmm
decision you have to make. And
Nope.
I think it's so refreshing to hear hear someone choose the path of happiness and fulfillment
Mhm.
over quote unquote that conventional, like everything
Yep.
on paper, it all looks like good, right? I have a good job, I've got benefits, I've got the thing. But so you go over there for a year, which turned into 8.
Mhm.
Where did you live in Japan? Did you move around or did you stay in the
No,
general area?
part of being like an interesting thing being on the jet program is you don't get to choose where you go, right? That's
Okay.
just they will place you somewhere. And so I got placed where I wanted to be placed, which was Nara. And I very strategically chose Nara because apparently like I did a lot of study on prior to the jet program. They're like people who try to choose the cool places like Osaka, Kyoto, or Tokyo, that sends a message to the jet program that they really know nothing about Japan, right? And they don't end up getting chosen at all. So I very strategically chose Nara, which I knew nothing about, but what I knew about it is that it was centrally located between Osaka, Kyoto, and all these other places. And they're like, but it was like, but it's a nowheresville place that almost no one has ever heard of, you know? So I picked that and I got placed there, got placed where I wanted. So I lived in Nara for the term of my contract, which was 3 years for the initial contract. And I loved it. Like I still to this day, like every time people plan their trip around, go like, where do I go in Japan? I'm like, well, first off, don't skip Nara because it's awesome. Like Nara is what everyone wants Kyoto to be. Everyone wants, everyone wants Tokyo to be like Akira, future Japan, and they want Kyoto to be ancient Japan. But Kyoto's a modern city. It's like going to Chicago. Like if you really want to go back in the time, you go to Nara.
So first of all, how does that
Mm.
even work? Like, do you need some sort of extended visa to stay in
Oh no,
in Japan
they
for 8, or they're just like, no, stay. We love.
they no they take care of the whole contract for I mean that
Wow.
like that's the whole thing of the jet program is it's like basically you have to apply for it but once they accept you it's just red carpet they find you a place to live they you get a
Amazing.
job yeah it's really good like and that's the other thing like people always tell me it's like oh you're so lucky to have your career and I'm like look I had nothing to do with it was the jet program like if you want to go to Japan go to Japan. Just go, apply for the jet program, hop on it, And people are always full of excuses. They're like, well, wham, wham, wham. I'm like, yeah, I'm on me too. Well, yeah, wham, wham, wham. But I decided to chuck all my wham, wham, whams in a bin and hop on a plane. So,
And now, did you always love, like, I know that you have the
Mhm.
Seven Samurai story, but did you
Mhm.
always also start reading manga and get
Mm.
into like comics and
Oh,
things like that
absolutely.
from a
Yeah.
young age? And
Yeah.
just,
And that was like I was always, I was always the Japan guy. Like it's so goofy looking back at pictures of me because even in like when I was 8 years old, and this would have been like 1980, back when nobody knew anything about Japan. I'm wearing these awful kanji t-shirts that say like Nihon, like rising suns. Like I was screwed from a young age. I was like, I look at pictures of myself and I'm like, that poor child had no choice. But yeah, I mean, because things were super limited, I bought, that was in the era of tape trading and like, you couldn't just turn on your TV for the most part and watch anime, but you got into like clubs and you swapped stuff back and forth, and most of them were in Japanese, so you couldn't understand them and it didn't matter. Read whatever manga was available as it came out. Started reading like Outlanders, which was one of the first Dark Horse manga that came out. My first tattoo is an Outlanders tattoo, so yeah, there's that too. But yeah, and that was actually a huge shock when I first got to Japan, and also like really helped shape my career and what I want to do with my life. Is once I got to Japan, I realized that the Japan that the West likes and the Japan that Japan likes are entirely different.
Mhm.
Stuff from Japan that is like super famous in the West is absolutely unheard of in Japan, and stuff in
Yeah.
Japan that is like fundamental to the core of the culture no one in America has ever even heard of. And like I was just like I got to Japan and like I was supposed to be like the Japan guy and I'm walking around I'm like I don't know any of this. Like who are these characters? What is this stuff? Why is Japan not and that happens a lot by the way on the jet program. When I was there long enough I used to serve as a regional advisor and you'd see people have this moment when they landed in Japan they had like this fairy tale of what it was going to be like and then they're confronted with the reality of it and they sort of like snap and there's people who can't deal with that and they just go back home, and then there's people who
Mhm.
adjust and stay. And that's why when we did interviews, we always tried to weed out the real otaku people because we knew that the Japan and their fantasy would never live up to the reality.
Yeah,
But it
I
was, yeah.
I don't know. Having just returned, this is the second time that I have
Mm-hmm.
had the pleasure of visiting, and not for nearly long enough, because we
Mm-hmm.
did spend a little bit of time in a couple places, but it was like on a cruise, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we were just
Yep.
stopping and going, right? So you don't really get to be as absorbed
Mm-hmm.
into the culture as you would like, but I for sure can understand why you would be like
Mm-hmm.
1 year became 8 years. It's just such an amazing, amazing place.
Oh yeah.
The
And
people, the
mm-hmm.
cleanliness, the bathrooms. I can't talk enough about the bathrooms.
Well, and I'll add the caveat that going there as a tourist is very different from living there.
Of
Like very
course, of
different.
course.
And one of the things that I like about living there so long is I no longer think it's amazing. Like to me, Japan is just a
Okay.
place. It's no
Right, right,
more or
right.
less amazing than Seattle. I mean, I love Seattle. I also love Osaka, but I know all the bad stuff about it as well as the good
Of
stuff. And
course, of course.
yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. But
Hmm.
I've also had the pleasure of traveling the world,
Hmm.
and like I've been to all seven continents, and I'm kind of like, no, yeah, Japan is still one of those places I think I would rather be. That New Zealand, but but I do know what you mean. As a tourist, it is totally different.
I mean,
Totally.
that's the thing is I've traveled the world too, and it's always like one of those things that I have to remind myself when I'm in a place. It's like, oh my God, this is so amazing. I'm like, that's because I'm
Right.
in the amazing stage. And you get to leave
Yes.
with just the amazing stage. Like the
Yes.
whole stage
Yes.
is amazing. And
Yes.
it's like going to Disneyland and you're there and it's so fun. And then you go home. But what if you stayed when they turned out the lights and you had to shovel the trash and you had to pick up the vomit and you had to do all the other stuff? And then that's the big difference of living somewhere versus touring there is that once you get into that stage, then you realize like, oh, it's just a place,
Yeah.
it's
Being in Orlando, Florida, your
mm,
Disney reference is certainly
right?
hitting home. Trust me. Yeah, I'm like, no, we do not go to Disney World. That is like
Yeah.
not where we ever go. We work there a lot though. We do shows, but
Yeah.
so so do you consider, where you're at home now, or do
Mhm.
you still consider Japan as home since it was home for so long, like,
I
or
mean,
is
they're
just
both
home wherever you're at?
yeah, they're both homes. Like, I've lived in three countries. I've lived in Scotland and Japan and the US, and to me
Okay.
they're all home. Like,
Okay.
I mean, it's not possible to separate one from the other. I mean, this is where I live now, but I mean, like we plan to, when we plan to retire in Japan because Japan's just such a better place to retire than the United States, which
Okay.
yeah, just for multiple reasons. But I go to Japan and Japan is as comfortable and familiar to me as a proverbial pair of old trousers. I mean, it's yeah. Japan holds no secrets or mysteries from me. It's a place where I feel very comfortable and I love it. I mean, like that was
Yes.
well, last time I went to Japan, and that's the other thing. Like when people, I remember I was talking to you about advice about Japan. I was like, I always surprise people by saying the one thing that I never eat in Japan is sushi because it's the
Right.
one thing that I can easily get anywhere, almost anywhere. I can get just as good as sushi here in Seattle as I can get in Japan. But there are certain things that only exist in Japan that are not transportable. And the
Right.
last time we went there in 2019, I was so excited because we were walking down the street and I saw what is my favorite Japanese restaurant of all time. My favorite Japanese restaurant is an old couple who will somewhere on the side of the road create an illegal restaurant. They'll hang up blue sheet tarps just to sort of like create a space. They'll put out a couple of tables. The old dude will have a 1,000-year-old cast iron grill that he's cooking grilled chicken yakitori on, and the old lady will have a cooler full of beers that you buy just straight from the cooler. And the thing that I love about those places so much is the atmosphere because you sit down and you're never alone. Like literally just by like my wife and I saw that, like I'm like, oh my God, they're still here. And we sat down immediately, everyone plops down at our table, beers are being passed around, chicken is just there, and you're in like this full comfortable atmosphere of a familiar place where you've never actually been before, and it's just so nice. And that's the Japan that I love the most.
Oh gosh, that's like the very interesting, like very local way of doing a pop-up, I guess. The hip
Yeah.
the hip
Yep.
pop-ups that you see in the States and
Oh
everything. I
yeah.
mean, that sounds
But this is
fantastic.
this is the least hip
A
thing
lot
you will ever,
grittier, very
yeah,
gritty.
the
A
least
lot.
hip thing that you will ever see because it's all just locals, just getting off
Oh, I
work
think
and
that's so
just
cool
yeah.
though. Yeah. But I think one of the things that makes me say something like, "Oh, I would live there." It's not just the place, I think it's
Hmm.
the people.
Oh yeah.
So, having traveled and like
Hmm.
interacted with locals and their willingness to be kind and
Hmm.
and just the safety that you feel there, I
Yeah,
think is quite different than so many places. That makes
it
it so
is.
unique. Yeah, it makes it
Although
really unique.
it's also like, and this is something that I think Japan actually has similar to Seattle, is that it's incredibly difficult to make friends. Because a lot of people, in Japan, and actually that's something we have what we call the Seattle freeze, which is basically we're extraordinarily polite, which should never be like mistaken
Mistaken
for
for
kind.
kind
You know,
for
exceeding,
friendly.
yeah, for friendly, because it's like, people, when I was living over there, I tell people it took me roughly 3 years to make my first Japanese friend. 3 years. Because for one thing, first thing, foreigners, they just all expect you to go home. So what's the point of establishing a friendship with
Oh,
someone who's just going to leave, so
yeah,
they'll have very superficial interactions. They like to invite you to parties because then you're the token foreigner and it suddenly makes the party interesting. But having any sort of like actual like emotional connection with someone, like a true friendship, as opposed to just like you're the dazzling foreigner to liven up the place, it takes an immense amount of time. And
hmm,
you also, it takes fluency in the language, which is something
of
else that I
course.
realize.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to talk about that for a second before we jump
Hmm.
into your work in the translations and X-Men and everything. But like
Hmm.
in terms of learning a language, because I know that as an adult, I've attempted to like my big dream. People
Hmm.
ask, what would your superpower be? And I'm like, I
Hmm.
want to be a polyglot. Like I
Oh
would love to
yeah,
go to any country and speak any language. And I'm like
be
waiting for
amazing.
the chip or whatever they're gonna
Hmm.
make in the next few
Yep.
years. It's just gonna implant. But yeah, I think that it's just as an adult, I haven't prioritized it enough to learn all the
Hmm.
languages I want just because I get so distracted and busy. But like, so it's my own fault. But I feel like it just, what was that? I guess, what was that like for you to be able to not just be able to speak, but like for me, I can speak Chinese, but I can't read
Hmm.
it very
Hmm.
well. Like I have like a few letters because it's literally for us. I don't know if it's the same for Japanese. I would imagine like it's you literally have to just memorize all
Oh
those
yeah.
characters. And
Mhm. Oh,
so
it's miserable. Yeah,
it's
absolutely
so
miserable. Yeah.
it's just like,
Hmm.
what?
Yep.
Why? I mean, what kept your motivation going and was it really hard for you?
I mean, yeah, it was obviously really hard. And like that was, I mean, that was the other thing I learned is I cannot learn a language without just living in there. I'm always impressed by those people that like, actually learn languages through studying. I am not one of those people, which is why my how do you learn Japanese advice is always so useless. I'm like, people are like, how do you learn Japanese? It's easy. Three simple steps. One, move to Japan. Two, live there for a very long time. Three, marry a Japanese person so that your daily life is in Japanese. Go do those three things and then you'll be awesome. But yeah, but I mean, my motivation, like one of my main motivations to really study not only just speaking Japanese, which, like you said, are two entirely different things, but reading it is I discovered the work of this manga artist Mizuki Shigeru, and in Japan, he is just like it's impossible to describe how famous he is in Japan. I always tell people he's like Walt Disney level of famous, but more so. Like he's so famous, he actually was decorated by the Emperor of Japan as what they call a person of cultural merit, where if he had not existed, the culture would be different, and that his very existence shaped Japanese culture. And he was just everywhere in Japan, and I had never heard of him, and that was so shocking to me because I'm like, once again, I was the Japan guy, but here's this fundamental thing. Like imagine if a person from Japan had come over and was like, I love American animation. Like, I am so into American animation. They're like, oh, what's your favorite Disney film? And they're like, who? Walt Disney? Never heard of the guy. I mean, it was like I was that ignorant. And so I just dedicated myself to reading as much of his works as I wanted to. And the only way, or as I could, the only way to do that was to master the language. There was no substitute. I think I was lucky to go there at the time I did also now because now there are more substitutes. Now, like Google translates a lot better. People use their phone, and maybe the motivation wouldn't have been as strong if I hadn't been in an absolute sink or swim situation. But that was really it. I was just like, I want to. And the more I knew, the more I realized that like I was only living in like this small bubble of Japan. I was living in this English speaking bubble, and the more that I learned of the language, the larger and larger it got until I was finally able to live in the entire country, which you can't do if you don't know the language.
Yeah, wow. And so for you now as a
Hmm.
translator, because I know I only have the context of me
Hmm.
and my martial world. It's like sometimes even in translation, it isn't just about language because we
Hmm.
talked about context
Yeah.
earlier. And when we're talking about something that's philosophical or
Hmm.
something from a specific time period, how does that change for you? And especially with the works that you've been translating,
Uh-huh.
of course, a lot of it is manga related and a
Hmm.
lot of it is just cultural, but do
Hmm.
you still stumble upon areas where you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to
Oh,
deep dive, or do you go to your wife and be like, okay, tell me like what does this mean to you? Like how different is it like in terms
yeah.
of that type of challenge?
I mean, all the time, like all the time, because translation is never just about words, like never. Like people have this idea that translation is just swapping one word for another, and it never is. Like there's context is, especially between two such disparate languages as Japanese and English, this is one of the things when I'm teaching translation classes, I try to tell people is that it's not about different words because fundamental concepts of human nature are different in one language versus the other. Like the very concept of love is different in Japanese than the very concept of love in English. And so if you swap this word here to be love, like daisuke, if you just swap that to be love, you have failed as a translator. All you're doing is translating the words. When you do a translation, especially with something like manga, you're not translating the words, you're translating the emotions, right? The emotional beats. When the author or the artist created the book, they have certain spots where they wanted you to laugh or they wanted you to cry or they wanted you to, feel, they wanted you to feel things. And so when you're looking in English, you're looking like not, you weren't trying to say, how can I make the reader feel these same emotions that the Japanese author wanted you to make you feel? And sometimes you just have to use entirely different words to do that than what the author actually wrote, because what they wrote won't provoke that same emotional response. And translation is also, it's such an art rather than a science. And one of the things that I do to showcase this is a friend of mine, Jay Rubin, and he's a fairly esteemed translator. He's a Harvard professor, and he translates Murakami Haruki, so much more esteemed than I am. But we have these things that we do called translator battles, where we'll do this before an audience, where we'll take the same text and we'll each do a translation of it, and we'll put them on screen to compare, and then we basically have fun, like fighting with each other about how awful their translate, how much better mine was. But they're always different,
Yeah.
noticeably different, and it's amazing how much context, how much a translator brings to the whole situation.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of weight to that then, right? Of like making sure that you are doing your best, especially if you're translating something where you can't just go and ask the author, or like if someone's deceased or something, and you have this responsibility that's like, okay, I am basically perpetuating all of this information, and it's like you have this spin on it that, like you said, you're even between two very esteemed translators, it could be kind of a different path. It must be kind of stressful, no?
I mean, I got over that stress a long
Okay,
time ago. If
because you've
I
been doing it so
Yeah,
long.
I've been doing it so long. But like I tell people, like there's a couple different metaphors I use for translation. Like one of them is like translation is like playing a piece of music on an oboe that was originally composed for piano. There's different keys, there's different
Yeah,
notes, it'll never be the same song. And because of that, also, it's also in a way like hearing a cover song of a band that you love. If you want to hear the original, if you want the authenticity in the original, there's only one choice, and that is to read it in the original language. Everything else is being seen through the lens of the translator 100% of
yeah,
the time. That's why you have different translations of famous works. I mean, that
yes,
used to be a big thing. Like if you go back into, older times, new translations of classical works was a huge market because people wanted to see all of the different interpretations and how they did it. Less so nowadays, but occasionally you'll do that. Occasionally you'll see a new translation. But in today's modern, like, and that's actually an interesting thing that happened in translation originally. Is originally like companies really put the translator forward. Like you would see older manga, like the translator was listed on the cover of the books and things like that. Then they stopped doing that and they started slowly burying the translator. And I remember talking to a publisher about that. He's like, well, because when manga first started, they needed a familiar white name on the book for readers to not be scared of, because it was just too foreign, and giving them, a translated by Jim Smith gave them like a familiar endpoint. But as readers started adopting more and more to manga, they wanted to believe that they were reading the original. And so they started to bury the translator more and more, because that way it sort of allowed readers the illusion that they were reading unfiltered works.
Right, right. There's like authenticity to it, and
Authenticity and all this.
it
Yeah.
felt more connected. What have you learned about yourself through one, learning that other language and being able to speak and read fluently, but also now as a translator? I would imagine it's changed how you communicate, or
Mhm.
how listen and learn, and just even
Oh,
watching films, enjoyment of things on a
yep.
regular basis. Like, what have you learned about yourself?
I mean, it's such being bilingual opens up such a broader world, and I wish that, like more countries being bilingual is the norm. And I think it's, one of America's issues is that we're such a multilingual culture, I think one of the biggest surprises, and I think people who are raised bilingual probably understand this better, is that when you speak in a different language, you have to almost become a different person. Like Zach in Japanese is a different person than Zach in English. I have to change my manners. I have to change my body language. Like I literally transform into a different human being, because that's how it works in Japanese, because communication is also body language. And if I used all these big American gestures when I'm
Right.
speaking Japanese,
Are you
I would come
angry?
off, yeah, I would come off as horrifically rude or frightening or terrified. And so you have to just sort of like shrink a little bit. And, when you switch over into Japanese mode, you have to be more
Right.
cognizant of social clues, and you have to be more aware of societal rank, which is something that I never think about in English, like
Okay.
because all of a sudden that becomes important. All of a sudden, how old
Yes.
someone is suddenly becomes
Yes.
important, and all these other different factors. And how old you are literally changes what language I am allowed to use with you. And there's just all these things there that I have to be cognizant of that I don't in English. English is so easy that way. Just like you can walk up to literally anyone and just be this is another thing that like there are words that only exist in certain languages that have no translation. And for English, one of those words that has no translation in Japan is hello, a universal greeting, one that you can use with literally everyone on earth. You can walk up to the most famous person on earth and say, like, hello, hello, President Biden. Hello, I don't know. I can't think of any famous people right now, but and then you can also go to someone's kid and be like, hello, Jimmy, you can use hello as a greeting. That does not exist in Japanese. In Japanese, it is impossible to greet someone without establishing rank or time of day. You have to do one of the two.
Yeah. Yeah.
They,
I don't think I've ever thought about it
you know,
like that.
yeah, Japanese does not have a universal greeting. English does.
Wow.
Like, I don't know. What about Chinese? Do they have a universal greeting that you can use with literally everyone? Or is it like Japan where greetings, you have to choose which greeting you use?
I think that it's evolved to where the typical, like, it's not really hello, like it's ni hao, right? Like, how are you,
Hmm.
or hello. So,
Yeah.
but I think it's evolved to that, but it is
Hmm.
very much usually specific to like who you're talking to. Because you're
Hmm.
right, rank in terms of like if you're speaking to an elder, if you're speaking
Hmm.
to a smaller person, like things kind of change. But I think a lot of that might change with tone.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that's really interesting. I haven't really
Yeah.
thought about that.
Yeah.
That's so
I mean,
fascinating.
I think about that
Oh,
stuff all the time because I mean, one reason because I wasn't raised bilingual, and another is because it's
yeah.
my job, and I just find language to be inherently fascinating like that,
Yes.
especially in
Yes.
terms of like one of the things I find the most interesting about different cultures and that has really changed my life is the concept of normal and realizing that there is no such thing as
Right.
normal. Yeah, everyone's idea of normal is culturally bound to what they were raised with, and normal is more
Yeah.
like familiar rather than normal is probably a better
Yes.
translation of normal,
Yes.
I was talking to my niece once about that. She's like, "Oh, in Japan, they eat raw fish. That's so gross." I'm like, "Well, to a Japanese person, the idea of eating a raw carrot is gross." She's like, "How is that gross? It's normal." I'm like, "It's normal to you, but in
Right.
Japan, if you really want to freak out a Japanese person, eat a raw carrot. They'll think it's the grossest thing they've ever seen."
That's so funny.
Hmm.
I think it's interesting, and maybe because like you said, I've grew up in a super cultural household
Hmm.
where different foods were the
Yep.
my norm, right? But I
Hmm.
would go literally to school and people would think that that's not normal.
Totally.
So that was always pointed out to me growing up. But I do want to talk about your work on
Hmm.
Ultimate X-Men,
Oh yeah,
and of
yeah.
course
Let's do
your
it.
what you're most recently working on and
Hmm.
everything like that. So you're co-writing this, yes, with
Hmm. Yep. With my pal Peach
Peach.
Morocco. Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes. So what's
that's
that been like?
That's been awesome. So, I mean, I did an interview with Sketch Magazine where we were talking about this recently, where it's like a lot of people feel like Pete Momoko suddenly came out of nowhere, and that's just not true. I mean, I met Pete Momoko in I think 2015 at Rose City Comic Con, and she was just there like everyone else. She had her little self-published comic. I bought a copy of it and I got to talking to her. And a lot of times you talk to people at conventions and you just like, oh, that was nice to meet you. And then you walk away and you never meet them again. But I really liked Peach. And so we kept in touch. And over the years, we've been like, meeting at conventions and everything. And we had, we kind of wanted to work on something together if it was possible and thought that would be kind of neat. In 2019, Peach and I really thought we were gonna like, 'cause that was still in 2019. She was still like completely unknown, and we thought that we finally were gonna have our big break, our big breakout work together because I'd been talking to Mike Mignola about doing
Yes.
Hellboy in Japan. And
Oh, cool.
so I'd been in kind of conversation with Mike Mignola because he's been wanting to do that for a while too. And he had been. I'm like, well, why don't we, get together? He's like, well, if we did, we'd need the right artist. I'm like, I know the right artist. So I brought Peach in and introduced Peach to Mike, and we did a bunch of like preliminary work. Peach had actually created like a short story basically as an audition for us for Mike Mignola. And he was into it and he was excited. And we were supposed to have a meeting, the three of us. It was going to be me, Peach, and Mike at Emerald City Comic Con 2020. Well, here comes, COVID. Everything vanished. It was just like everything just disappeared. And I was heartbroken because I was like, that was it. That was our shot. And it's just gone. And Mignola is the type of guy who, he's great, but he's also like he does what he wants to do. And when his attention has gone, then you're gone. And that's all there is to it. Like you had your chance and then it was gone. And he went on to something else. And like I talked to him, he's like, yeah, we just decided to go a different direction. I'm like, that's it. End of story. Like our chapter of the Hellboy story was closed before I ever got to start. And it's like Peach and I were like, well, I don't know, let's try and think of some other stuff. So we were kind of like brainstorming some things, and then out of nowhere comes CB Cebulski, who is the editor-in-chief of Marvel. And one thing that maybe people don't know a lot about CB Cebulski is he also was on the JET program. So just like me, he was also someone who lived in Japan and speaks fluent Japanese and has spent a lot of his career bringing Japanese talent into Marvel Comics. And he saw Peach Momoko. I think someone introduced her to him at a convention. I forget which convention it was, but anyways, he just like saw this amazing potential in her, and boom, that's it. Like that's pretty much the rest is history sort of thing there. I literally like I got it like that was really nice of Peach honestly to bring me along for the ride because she didn't have to. She was posed for superstardom and I could have been left behind, been like, "Oh,
Oh.
goodbye, Peach." Waving from the dock as she sailed off, but she did not she did not forget her friends. And yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah,
amazing.
which was amazing. Yeah.
Were you always an X-Men fan growing up?
Oh, huge. I mean, like,
So that must be like kind of
yeah.
surreal.
Oh, it's totally surreal. Like I can't even describe how huge an X-Men fan I was. I literally own an X-Men #1 signed by Stan Lee that was my 13th birthday present because,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, I have a full collection of X-Men, I think from issue 1 through about 350. I mean, X-Men was my jams. Like every now and then I'm just sitting,
Okay.
yeah. Every now and then I'm just sitting here like I'm like, you know what? Good job, Zach. Good job quitting that job at Amazon. Well done. That worked out good for you.
Right? I think
Yeah.
I see, and I love hearing these stories because
Hmm.
people, especially in my culture, there's a bit of a stereotype where parents like want you to take the
Hmm.
safe route always, always, always. There's not
Hmm.
a lot of love for like the artist path or that unconventional path, or
Hmm.
unless it's your family business, you're allowed to do that, of course.
Yeah.
But but so it's always exciting to me
Hmm.
when I hear, and especially when it's not right out of school. Like you
Hmm.
did your career, you were in a safe
Yep.
environment, and then you're like, yeah, I'm just gonna like switch it up. And
Yeah.
I mean, and then
Well,
it's worked out really well.
yeah. And I mean, when it comes to families, like my mother was always extraordinarily supportive of that. Like even when I was young, she was like, because that's like I went to art school when I was young. She's like,
Okay.
why not? Why not do something you enjoy? Like your life is what it is, and there's no point whatsoever in living a life that you don't enjoy. And I,
Yes.
was like, well. I don't want to go to college. She's like, why don't you go to art school? I'm like, well, I don't think I want to be an artist. She's like, who cares? The Beatles went to art school. None of them became artists. It's just a thing that people do. And I was like, okay.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. So,
Yeah.
so then you're also all constantly translating, correct? Like it's just like you
Yep.
usually have a project that's going on, and how do you find
Yeah.
those, and how do they find you, or how does that work?
Well, when I first started my career, I think like there's a couple different paths, I guess you can go as a translator, and like I first started mine translating I didn't want to be a translator. I wanted specifically to translate the works of Mizuki Shigeru. And that was like the artist that I fell in love with in Japan. And so I actually got super drunk one time at a friend's bar in Osaka and climbed on a table and like said, I shall be the one to bring Mizuki Shigeru to the West. And like so I like that was my whole plan. And I finally did that, like working with Drawn and Quarterly and started doing his works. And like that was all I really wanted to do. But then it's a weird thing when you have a dream and accomplish it, and then you're like, well, what now? Like, what do I do now? Like I had this goal and I met it. And do I just quit? Do I just go back? Because a lot of people will do that. A lot of people will, like, I remember I reading saying that about writing books one time is that, the percentage of people who write one book versus the percentage of people who write two is an astronomical drop. Because a lot of people, they just want to check that one box, but they don't want to, but then going to, by the time you get to like four books or five, it's just a tiny, tiny little percentage. And so once I'd achieved that, I was like, well, there's other people whose work I want to work on. So I ended up doing that. I worked for a couple of different companies. Like I translated like Matsumoto Leiji's stuff and I translated some other stuff. And then I translated some stuff that I didn't really love. And I realized that I had no interest in being what I consider to be like a line translator. Like you're just there and you're assigned a project and you work on it, And I'm like, I would much rather be the elegant, bespoke translator who works specifically on projects that he loves and nothing else. Because I don't really need translation to pay my bills, which is a nice thing. I have enough other different jobs, so translation just becomes sort of part of the portfolio of things that I do, which kind of allows me the luxury to be extraordinarily picky with what I work on. And I also have found out that I don't like all of the companies. I like some of the companies more than others, Like I absolutely love Dark Horse. Dark Horse is my heart and soul, I mean, they have always been, and so I love Dark Horse. And Drawn and Quarterly is my other one. I mean, those two are my comic families, and they always have worked for me. I can pretty much have my whole career working on for Dark Horse and Drawn and Quarterly. And my other one, like I love Udon. So like those three, and I'm pretty comfortable there. Like I'm not working on all the cool stuff, I'm not working on the stuff from Viz, and I don't want to be. Like I know the guys that work for those, and they have such fast deadlines and like an enormous pressure and like
In the
good
grind.
yeah, good for you, David Evelyn. You can really pump Caleb Cook. You guys are awesome. I will not do that. I'm 52 years old. I'll be sitting here with my little bespoke manga doing my, my little translation that is critically acclaimed and doesn't sell very well. I'll be perfectly happy with that.
I think that's amazing. And I don't know enough about the genre to like
Mhm.
speak any bit of any sort of sense, but I have spoken to a lot of creators and a lot of different people over the past about comics, as you well know, and
Mhm.
a lot of people credit manga as being kind of like the gateway and the door opening for a lot of
Mhm.
females who
Oh
were
yeah.
able to start reading comics more and it making more accessible and making it more welcome for that. Would you agree with that, and
Oh,
what would you
100%.
say is
Like
the reason why?
I mean, I think of in terms of comics as a medium, Japan is unquestionably number one, right? Like
Mhm.
they are, I don't know, I always hate using metaphors for sports because I literally do not play or follow any sports, but like they are the World Series, right? They are
Mhm.
number one in the world. And everyone else, like Western comics, we're pretty much your local farm team. We're like your that's all we are. The best-selling American comic would be
Mhm.
considered to be an absolute disaster by Japanese standards.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
because their comic industry is so immensely, well, for one thing, it's immensely more matured. I think one of the big things that happened in the comics, like both manga and Western comics, I always hate using the word manga, by the way. I don't know. I know I use it because it's the proper parlance, but I think it's silly because when you're speaking Japanese, manga just means comics, and so all Western
Right,
comics are
right.
also manga. So it's like
Yes.
saying like, like I don't know, like pan or bread. Like they literally mean the exact same thing to
Yes,
me.
yes, yes.
But
To
for
you, but not to
yeah,
everybody else.
but for to everyone else, like manga and Western comics, they followed a fairly parallel path at the start. They both started around the 1930s, the 1940s. The real big change came in the 1950s, where America had a moral panic. Actually, both Japan and America had like a moral panic where they're like, oh, think of the children. And American comics just caved. They instituted the Comics Code Authority. They stopped all their horror comics, like Frederick Wertham and all of that stuff. If you know your comics history, America basically in the 1950s just like stunted the growth of comics. Japan did not cave. Japan went through their moral panic and actually kept going forward. So they are just a more advanced use of the medium of comics than the West, because we had this big stop where we went backwards, and we didn't really start going forward again until probably about, I'd say, about the 1980s, when you get people like Alan Moore and Frank Miller who started, and that was probably a little bit before that, I mean, maybe like the 1970s with Neil Adams, and like there was moves forward, but by that time we were already behind in the race. And so manga was able to mature as a market as well as a medium beyond what the West was able to do. Well, one of the reasons for that is the West decided comics were for kids. And so all of our markets were really stunted. Japan never thought that. So they were able to mature markets and specific markets for 30-year-old women and the problems 30-year-old women would have, for 50-year-old, 60-year-old men who are retiring, the problems they have, for every age range and every possible human dilemma. There got to be a comic for that. And
It's more
so
accessible.
yeah, it's just more accessible. I mean, it's vastly more accessible. If you're a woman reader and your gateways through manga, well, of course, because there's 1,000 books there designed specifically for you. Whereas opposed in Western comics, there's maybe four, and if that, and those four
Mhm.
are hard to find and hard to get to. So yeah, that's
That makes
perfectly
sense.
natural. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I always find, I was really curious in your take on it because you
Hmm.
understand it so well,
Yeah.
and have been in around it. And since so many people have said that to me,
Hmm.
and I was like, oh, okay, that's fascinating. I
Yeah.
never really thought about it that way. But we're almost on time here, but I wanted to ask you because you talked a lot about in the beginning how what was
Hmm.
so popular here isn't popular there, and vice versa, and everything. And I found that really interesting because in this like last decade, you hear the
Hmm.
kids are coming through and they're all talking about like Naruto,
Hmm.
and even like a little before that we had like some of the anime is really popular and
Hmm.
everything too. And way back we have like the Dragon Balls and everything like that. Like, so how do you see that kind of partnering? Because of course that's a different medium now,
Yeah.
is of course anime.
Yep.
Is that kind of the same thing where that's not as universally popular? Like, are we
So
getting the same stuff that people in
it's
Japan are watching, or is it again completely different?
I will say it's some of the stuff is universally popular, but the
Okay.
thing is, and this is something no one likes to hear, is what the West really loves is all the entertainment for children. Like
Yeah.
most of the stuff that people are watching is aimed at elementary school children.
Right, right.
And that was also shocking for me when I went over to Japan, because like I went over there and because I was teaching at high school and I'm trying to bond with the high school students. I'm like, oh man, yeah, I really love Neon Genesis Evangelion. And they're like, yeah, I think my 8-year-old brother is into that. Like it's almost embarrassing, because one of the reasons for that is that stuff is super easy to translate, both culturally. It
Oh,
require
okay.
there's no nuance required for Dragon Ball Z and Naruto and One Piece and all of that stuff, right? There's
Right.
no nuance required. It is simply it is entertainment designed for 8-year-old boys. That is literally what it is. Like, 8 to 10-year-old boys. And that is the stuff that is super huge over here. What is not popular over here is anything that requires like I was interpreting for a professor of manga once, Kurata sensei, and it was terrible because I was doing it at a convention that was full of people in cosplay, and he was like, one of the things that's surprises me about Western readers is that as a Japanese reader, as you mature, you're expected for your tastes, to enjoy more nuanced entertainment, to move on and like read things that are more specific to you and like these sort of struggles. And basically, like as a reader, you're expected to mature and evolve. He's like, but Western readers seem to all be stuck as children. He's like, you're not supposed to be a 30-year-old woman and still reading Sailor Moon. And he says this to a room full of 30-year-old women dressed as Sailor Moon. And I have to interpret for him. And as soon as he said that, I'm like, oh man, I
You're
have to
like, I
do
hope I
this.
have my running shoes on.
Yeah, I'm like, I mean, but when you think about it, it's true. Like all of the really like, anything that's on a more mature level that's aimed at adults, it's harder to find an audience for it here in the West because all of those concepts, all those cultural concepts, they just don't translate as easy because,
Right.
but an 8-year-old boy with superpowers punching dragon, no worries. No barriers whatsoever. Bunch of friends on a pirate ship who get gum powers, no nuance required. There's no nuance whatsoever. And that's the stuff that gets really popular. So yes, it is the stuff that's usually popular in Japan is also popular in the West, but the difference is the audience.
Oh, yeah, that's painful.
Yeah.
Is this the same for like the films, like the Miyazaki films that are
Oh,
like,
100%. Yeah, 100%.
okay,
Those are children's
those are
films. I mean, yeah.
still geared
Some, I
towards a
mean,
much younger
yeah.
audience. And some
The
of
the
those
thing
are
about
pretty dark.
that, but then again, Japan has a much huger appetite for darkness. Like that's one of the other things that is different. Is like we'll see that's like that's dark, that's mature. But in Japan, they think children are fine with that. One of the things,
Ah,
my personal idea, I have really nothing to back this up other than personal experience, is one of the things
okay.
that Japan is such an inordinately safe country that like literally when I was over there, one time we were at a party at my friend's house and we had like run out of ice and they're like, oh, well, you can send my daughter. And it was like 10 o'clock at night. They're like, we'll send my daughter to the grocery store to get more ice. And I'm like, the grocery store is like 5 blocks away. And they're like, so they stuck a bunch of cash in this little toddler's hand, and she goes walking out at 10 at night, toddling down the street with a thing full of cash. Not a single person would ever have worried that she would not come back with a bag
Yeah,
of ice,
this is what I meant earlier
Yeah,
about safe. Yeah, it's
yeah.
like a very different place
And
than
so and so because they have this innate sense of safety, they don't try and protect they don't like they're more free to play with dark subjects than people that actually have fear. And without fear, they don't really consider those to be like super dark subjects, because it's just
wow.
like, yeah. So from a cultural standpoint, and there's also like there's a different standpoint in Japan where it's like in animation and in comics, no one actually gets hurt, so it doesn't matter. It's just lines on
Uh,
paper. Like if you draw a picture of someone's head exploding, what difference does that make? But that's very different from visually seen that,
yeah.
and that's reinforced constantly in their society. When I was doing my master's degree, one of the things that I did showed as the difference was the way that news is presented. Like America's news is presented very shocking with headlines and drastic photos and blood and blood and blood, whereas Japan's headlines are basically the world is a very safe place. Like there's no crime that's reported. Crime is only reported after they've been caught. It'll be like police apprehend subject.
Right, right,
Um,
right, right.
yeah, so it's just it's this weird sense of what is allowable for children versus what is not allowable to children. But I mean, but like some of the tougher stuff, like there's a series I've been desperate to try and bring over to the United States called Midnight Diner, which I absolutely love. And because it doesn't look like manga, because it's more nuanced, because the art style is a little more I guess like experimental. It's very hard to find readerships for stuff like that. Even though it's a
Mm,
hugely popular series in Japan, it's won the Tezuka
right.
Prize. It's got a TV adaptation in both China, Korea, and as well as
Yeah.
Japan. Like it's just a monster of a series in Japan, but it is so hard to find an audience here because it is more nuanced than we're all friends on a boat with gum powers, and that is just it's just so hard. And it can be a little painful as a translator too, because I'm like, come on, Americans, grow up, grow up a little, grow up.
Well,
Yep.
that's gonna take some time. We're
Yes,
we're
it is.
it's so fascinating that America is supposed to be
Mhm.
such a progressive and
Mhm.
futuristic place when we're so behind in so many ways.
Yep. 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 Yep.
So many ways. So many ways.
Oh
But
yes.
that is another podcast.
It's a whole nother
It's
podcast.
a whole nother
Yep.
podcast. Well, Zach, tell us how our listeners, our viewers, and everybody can grab
Yep.
all of your work, look into it, find you, follow you, learn from you, all the things.
So I've got two really exciting things I'm working on that for some reason have similar names, and I don't know why. It wasn't planned. The one is the Ultimate Guide to Japanese Yokai. So I just put out this yokai encyclopedia. It's my first book through Tuttle. I'm really excited about it. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of books. I mean, basically yokai are Japanese monsters, and it was really like my attempt to answer this question of what are yokai, which is a question that's been asked for as long past as the Meiji period. And part of the fun is that everyone disagrees on it. Like I decided I brought in kaiju and I brought in all this other cool stuff. And that's a really cool book. And I'm also working on Ultimate X-Men with my pal Peach Momoko. Both of them have Ultimate in the title. That was not planned at all. Ultimate X-Men is also great. I love the fact that Peach and I were basically just been given a blank check to do whatever we want. And it's so fun. And people are like I'll see some people online, they're like, well, I wonder when will it become a regular X-Men series? I'm like, never. Don't just give up. It's gonna be Peach and I just being awesome, and you guys are just gonna have to deal with that. And so far people love it, which has been really nice.
It's
but yeah,
beautiful. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
And working on comics is great. Working on comics with your friends is the best thing ever. Like it is so much fun. So
love it.
Yep.
Love it. Well, this has been so lovely. I
Yeah,
am so
thanks,
glad
Mimi.
we finally caught up, and
Yep.
it only took like 9 months,
Yeah, right?
so it's
Yeah.
not too bad.
Are you going to be at Rose City this year?
I don't think I'll be at
Oh,
Rose City
I was
this
gonna
year.
say if you are, I would
know.
put you on a panel. I'd put
I
you right on a panel.
know.
I wouldn't
thank
even
you
let
for
you.
that.
Yeah, I wouldn't even let you choose. I'd just come
I-
get you and I'd sit you down and be like, you're
You're
on
like,
the panel
hey,
now.
I need to
Yep.
talk to you about something, and then we
Yeah.
walk into the room, and everyone's like sitting there. Yeah,
Yep.
I
Like,
thank you for
there
the
she
warning
is.
on the future ambush.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it would have been a pleasure. I
Yep.
absolutely love Rose City. It's a little bit tight with my schedule this year. I have kung fu
Totally
things to
understand.
take care of. But
Absolutely.
maybe next year,
Yeah.
maybe next year. You never
All right.
know, because it really is one of my favorite cons.
It
Absolutely.
is so much fun.
We
Yeah.
did MegaCon here this year in Orlando, and I was like,
Oh, nice. Yeah. Oh, really? Was that great? Okay.
It was great because our panel was full. I mean, we're very fortunate. Our panels are
Yeah.
always really full because everybody wants to learn kung fu and wield swords and stuff. Who doesn't want to do that? But it's just so crazy. It's so hectic. It's just
Swords
so
are cool.
overwhelming though.
Oh,
like
yeah.
the size of MegaCon. It was,
Yep.
and I will say, shout out, like you said, to the
Mm.
Rose City humans, because their organization, their communication with panelists and things, far superior to something like MegaCon. It was completely insane. So
I would bet that learning kung fu, you get like a lot of the same questions that I get, where people, once they find out that it's not really instantly easy, they drop out because people hate that. They're like, how long does it take to learn kung fu? And they're like, 30 years.
Yes,
like,
thank you.
Bye.
Right, exactly. Which is why I'm so
Yep.
fascinated by your discipline and just the passion for it. I think it's fantastic. So this has been a real pleasure, and I'm sure we'll catch up again soon, and maybe one day on a future panel together.
All right, I'll throw you on there. All right, thanks, Mimi.
All right, Zack Davisson,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram or Facebook.